The air was thick with tension as Marcus Carter sat in his car outside Lincoln Elementary School. His fingers drummed anxiously against the steering wheel, his mind racing with the words his 10-year-old son, Jaden, had tearfully confided in him just hours ago. "Dad, my teacher said I'll never be successful because people like me don't work hard enough." The words cut through him like a blade. Marcus had always taught his son to be proud of who he was, to stand tall in the face of adversity. But nothing prepared him for the day his child would be the target of blatant racism in a place that was supposed to nurture his growth. Lincoln Elementary was an upper-middle-class school in a predominantly white neighborhood. Marcus had moved his family there in hopes of giving Jaden the best education possible, believing that hard work and determination would open doors. But this incident shattered that belief. As a single father, Marcus had always been Jaden's fiercest advocate, but he had never faced a battle like this. The more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about Jaden. It was about every child who had been silenced, every parent who had been ignored. This was a systemic issue, and he wasn't going to let it slide. He took a deep breath and made his decision. He was going to confront the school, demand answers, and ensure his son's voice was heard. What he didn't know yet was just how far this fight would take him. The next morning, Marcus walked into the school with Jaden by his side, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination. He requested a meeting with Mrs. Whitmore, Jaden's teacher, and the principal, Mr. Dawson. When Mrs. Whitmore entered the room, her expression was unreadable. Principal Dawson, a middle-aged man with a rehearsed smile, greeted Marcus politely, but with an air of condescension. "Mr. Carter, I understand you have concerns," he began, gesturing for them to sit. Marcus wasted no time. "My son told me that Mrs. Whitmore made a comment about him never being successful because of who he is. I want to know exactly what was said." Mrs. Whitmore shifted in her seat. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I simply encouraged Jaden to work hard. Sometimes, students misinterpret things." Marcus felt a surge of anger. "Are you saying my son is lying?" Before she could respond, Jaden spoke up. His voice was quiet but firm. "You said people like me don't work hard enough. That we just want handouts." A heavy silence filled the room. Marcus studied their faces, watching as Principal Dawson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Carter, I assure you, we take these matters seriously. We will look into it." But Marcus wasn't convinced. Something in their responses felt rehearsed, dismissive. He had seen this play out before, a promise to investigate, followed by silence. That's when he decided he needed to dig deeper. Marcus started talking to other parents. At first, many hesitated, afraid of retaliation, but eventually, stories began to emerge. Other students had experienced similar treatment from Mrs. Whitmore, subtle microaggressions, lower grades despite strong performance, and discouraging comments about their futures. Determined to expose the truth, Marcus reached out to the local news and civil rights organizations. The story gained traction, and soon, reporters were asking questions the school could no longer ignore. The school board called for an official review, but Marcus knew how these investigations usually ended. He needed undeniable proof. That's when a former teacher came forward. She had left the school after witnessing systemic racism within the institution and was willing to testify. Marcus felt a mix of hope and fear. He had gathered evidence. He had witnesses, but would it be enough? The school board hearing was approaching, and he knew that no matter what, he had to stand tall for his son. The school board meeting was packed. Parents, teachers, reporters, everyone was eager to hear what would unfold. Marcus stood before the board, his voice steady. He presented the testimonies, the reports, and finally, the former teacher's statement. The tension in the room was palpable. Mrs. Whitmore sat stiffly, her face flushed. Then came the verdict. After careful consideration, the board has decided that while Mrs. Whitmore's comments were inappropriate, they do not warrant termination. Instead, she will undergo sensitivity training. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Marcus clenched his fists. "That's it," he demanded. Jaden looked up at him, disappointment clear in his young eyes. The decision was a slap in the face, but Marcus refused to let it be the end. He continued to push for policy changes, and his case became a catalyst for a broader discussion about racism in education. Parents rallied behind him, demanding reform. News outlets continued to cover the story, forcing the district to take further action. Eventually, stricter policies were put in place to prevent such incidents from happening again. As for Jaden, the experience had changed him. He had seen injustice firsthand, but also witnessed the power of standing up for what was right. One night, as Marcus tucked Jaden into bed, his son looked up at him. "You didn't let them win, Dad." Marcus smiled. "Neither did you. Change didn't come easy, but this was only the beginning." And for Marcus, the fight was far from over.